Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the May 2nd, 2019 State Board of Education meeting. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. Welcome to all board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. I remind the audience and those listening that this body meets monthly with its official meeting scheduled for the first Thursday of the month. Committee meetings are typically held on the Wednesday prior to the official meeting day. And this month, the board was engaged in its biannual planning and work session where we discussed educational equity, early literacy, whole child, principal pipeline, actually leadership pipeline, charter school oversight and accountability, assessments, school systems modernization, and we did work on our strategic plan. It's fitting that May 8th is School Nurse Day as we've concluded another planning and work session that highlights whole child as a guiding principle of our school system. Since 1972, National School Nurse Day has been set aside to recognize school nurses and fosters the understanding of why these health professionals are so important in the educational setting. This board knows how much school nurses matter to our students. We acknowledge the accomplishments of school nurses in North Carolina and in other states. Your efforts meet the needs of students by improving the delivery of health care in our schools. Thanks to all of our school nurses for all you do every day to care for our students. I remind our on-site visitors and online listeners that you can follow the meeting online and see all of our materials by going to the SBE meetings at the northcarolinapublicschools.org. Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. And if you become aware during the course of the meeting of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It'll then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and voting on the matter. At this time, I call on my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, and please join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Chairman Davis, I would like to take a point of personal privilege and let everyone in the audience know and those listening in that this week is the week that we honor our principals of America. So it's National Principal Appreciation, whether it's today or yesterday, I'm going to say this week, we're doing that. They should be honored 24/7, 395 days a week. And yesterday we had a very, very informative panel of experts and practitioners who informed us about the direction of standards and licensure and the role of the principal in the health of our pipelines, our preparation pipelines in North Carolina. And I just want to believe that we all benefited from that panel discussion. I certainly did. And we have, what more can I say? We have the artifact to my left, a living artifact of an outstanding principal in North Carolina, the Wells Fargo North Carolina Principal of the Year, just full of energy and just this turnaround spirit that exudes from him. So let's just hear it for Tabari. Thank you, Chairman Davis.
Thank you. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda, and if not, seek a motion for approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Lieutenant Governor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Buxton. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kamenetz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. We have an agenda. Thank you. I now turn to Ms. Cecilia Holden to come forward to provide a legislative update.
Good morning.
Good
morning.
Lots going on. And what I'm going to attempt to do is to hit some very high-level bullets for you today. You've got some documents in front of you that are more extensive in detail that you can refer to after the meeting today. If you've got specific questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. First thing I'll point out is so far we've got 349 related bills that are specific to K-12 public education. 49 of those have actually made crossover so far. The crossover date, we've got one more week to go and bills are flying. So I don't know what that number will look like in the end, but whatever it is, we've got 49 to date. And then anything that makes it for crossover is going to be able to be considered this session and then in the short session. In terms of the big news, we had the Education Committee, Appropriations Committee come out with their House budget last week, and the big budget for the House should probably be voted on today. So then the next step in the process will be for the Senate to come out with their version, and anything that's in either one of those would end up in compromise for them to come out with the bigger budget that would then go forward to the governor. In regards to a couple of high-profile bills that did not make crossover, there's a focus this session on licensure, teacher licensure, and of course testing. And so if I can just touch real quickly on one bill that did not make crossover, that did make crossover, is House Bill 521. This particular bill, it addresses a 3-year transitional license, which is a creation of a new license for teachers. Part of the bill focus was to try to get out-of-state teachers quicker into the pipeline in North Carolina. The other part of the bill is focused on, while teachers are pending licensure, that they would be able to be paid on a teacher salary schedule if they have a good standing license in another state. And the purpose behind that is some of the districts are paying teachers on a substitute teacher pay, which of course is a very low pay, and therefore it's difficult to keep them. So this bill would allow them to be paid with state funds while they were pending licensure, and then the districts would not be held liable for that. Another high-profile bill that did make crossover is Senate Bill 621, and this focuses on test reduction. This bill would eliminate the use of the North Carolina final exam, and then it would go on further to require, in even-numbered years, local boards of education reviewing all their local standardized testing and reporting that back. In terms of the bills that are high profile that have not yet made crossover, I want to focus on those, but I'd first like to start with one that deals with financial literacy course, and this has been receiving a whole lot of press. I know that our Lieutenant Governor has been a big advocate behind that, so if I might take a moment to turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor if he wants to give us some concept behind that bill.
Sure. I'm assuming, thank you, Cecilia, I'm assuming that everybody's kind of aware of this or been made aware of this. The intent of the financial literacy and economics legislation is to create a 4-credit class for high school. I mean, we've had financial literacy and economics in high school before, but not for credit as an elective course, and obviously students are competing for GPAs to get into college, and so most students by far do not take this course. Obviously, it goes without saying, but we have $22 trillion in debt in this nation. Our largest form of personal debt is student loan debt at $1.6 trillion and growing every single day. We have over $130 trillion of unfunded liabilities or promises made to people that we have no funds in the bank to pay for a long-term future. And so I think, what we have is a lot of students, not to their fault at all, graduating high school that don't have a firm concept of economics and financial literacy. And I think that it is there's overwhelming support in the community. People see this, they see the need for this. Even a lot of the people that have been taking the training and for these courses in other states like Virginia, who this legislation is modeled after, even the teachers come away from that training going, wow, I wish I would have known this in high school. How come we didn't know this already? And so I think it's good across the board, not just for our students, but for our adults as well, and even for our families, because I think the students take this back into their homes as well and can teach their parents some of these concepts. A lot of people would say, well, it's a lot of work to have a 4-credit class for balancing your checkbook, and that's not about balancing your checkbook. That would be one aspect of it, but there's a whole slew of things this is about. I don't know, Jamie Falkenberry from my office is here. I don't know if you've passed out that information or not, but Jamie's got he's got the curriculum as it would be laid out through the standards here. He'll pass that out. I would also encourage everybody to read the legislation, because there's been a lot of misinformation related to what's actually in the bill itself and how we go about doing that. One of the big pieces of controversy has been about adding things onto the teacher's plate. I can say that there's probably no bigger proponent than me of saying we don't need to add anything additional onto the teacher's workload, for sure. But at the same time, we've been working, our staff and legislative staff has been working with DPI and others to work this into the rework of social studies standards. That was being done anyway. We were at that point in time, that 5-year period, where we were going to be reworking social studies, so working this into that. So the intent is to make sure that we're not adding anything additional onto the plates of these teachers, and also to note that it's not just social studies teachers who can teach this, that any teacher can go and get this training over the summer, get their $500 stipend for taking this training, and then go back and be able to teach financial literacy. So we're kind of spreading that love around as well to other teachers. And anyway, that's a kind of a broad update. I guess, Cecilia, what I'd be interested in is if anybody has questions, to maybe dive a little bit deeper into some specific things that you might be interested in asking.
Dr. Oxendine.
I know my question is gonna go in the weeds, I'll just go ahead and say that, so I'll probably have to talk with the curriculum department division on this. So, it's in social studies. I'm looking at standards, content standards, 1 through several standards. So these standards are coming straight from the standard course of study in social studies, is that correct?
The standards you're reading, or the ones that
The ones that are on this page?
The ones that are on that page that Jamie just passed out, those are the new standards that are being created for
I
this
see.
course.
Okay. This looks good. I'll do some further talks with the curriculum division on this.
Jamie, yeah.
Yes, sure.
The standards that you have are the economic standards. There's also the financial literacy standards that are similar to what we've already been teaching in our schools, except they're a little bit more detailed. But what we find is when we talk to people with a lot of stakeholders, they say, well, why don't we just keep this as a half course credit, or just push this in with something else? It's impossible to do when you include the economic standards as well.
Right.
And just take some time, and it may take you 5 minutes just to read through them, but you'll see how much more in depth they go.
Very good.
And the knowledge that the students will learn from this. And what we've seen in other states that have implemented this, their teachers actually benefit a lot from understanding the curriculum that's involved with that.
I'm impressed.
Mr. Ford.
Sure. And as the Lieutenant Governor said, we did not want to put we don't want to add another hour onto another course. And having talked with everyone from the CTE department to the social studies, the curriculum, the DPI, to the superintendent and their staff, as well as the General Assembly, it was an agreement that I believe that we're one of only 2 states in the nation, I'll have to get you on this, but that have multiple history courses spread out. And I believe that the social studies department here was already looking at realigning some of the standards. So
For American history.
For American history, sorry about that. For American history. So what we're doing is, what the legislation says is that the 4th social studies credit will be this economics and personal finance course, and then it will be up to you, the state board, to approve what DPI lays forward with the other 3 courses, one of which will, the Senate version is that there will still be the founding principles, but the founding principles can include early American history as well.
Mr. Ford.
appreciate that. So what we have before us here are the economic standards, right?
Those are just the economic standards because the financial literacy standards that we'll be using from that's in the legislation are similar to what we're doing right now, but they're a little bit more in depth. I can get you a copy of those too.
They're
Yeah,
still being created.
They're still being
You can
created,
tell them
yes.
about the commission that's put together to create those, if you would, just update
Well,
them on.
yeah, if you don't mind, like, who's the entity that's creating both this and the financial literacy?
Sure.
standards?
So we're using what it's called the Council of Economic for Education. It's a national organization that is a lot of accreditation across the nation on educating students as well as adults on financial literacy and economics. And we're using their best practices that have been used in other states. What we're using is specific standards too. The ones that were done after the financial crisis in 2009 for financial literacy, and then their economic standards that they released in 2013. And we're purposely using those specific standards because they've already been benchmarked and used throughout the nation, but we also don't want to get into a situation before where we just say we're going to accept the Council of Economic Standards and then get into the Common Core situation again where an entity owns the standards, and we don't want to say we're using the most current version because then we lose control over those standards. So if the Council for Economic Education at any time changes their standards, we will be using the ones that we've already approved and that we can move around and
So
use for our
North
state.
Carolina will approve their own
Yeah,
standards?
yes, but they will be modeled off these standards. So we can add to whatever we want. And the legislation right now, even the Council for Economic Education doesn't include how to pay and save for college, and that's in the legislation right now. So you as the state board can say, well, I don't know, there's a certain topic that these standards don't cover and you feel really passionate about it, then we can include that standard.
The board will have final approval.
The board will
on
have
that, Mr.
final
Ford.
approval.
And this may be counterproductive because we may not be able to do anything about it from here, but the financial literacy piece I get. Having taught civics and economics, I know a lot of these concepts are things that we teach in our course, right? So I'm just like wondering, what was the impetus of the calculus behind creating a separate sort of course to focus in on just the macroeconomic pieces of that?
It's a very good question. What we've found out from the field, and this is no fault of the teachers at all, is that either there are some schools that are doing this great. So I'm not speaking for all, but for a lot of sections, the teachers didn't either feel comfortable teaching it or they did not have the background to teach it. Therefore, they glanced over it, or they didn't dive as deep as they should have into these standards. And with the professional development that they're going to be going through either over the summer, again, that $500 stipend, or if there's opportunities during the school year for them to receive this professional development, they'll be better prepared to deliver in depth all these standards and cover them.
And I think, Mr. Ford, you related to the credit for the course as well is really important to make sure all students are taking this. And this isn't, some people have said, well, we're rushing this through, and it doesn't start until 2020 with the freshman class, the 2020 freshman class. So that is the point where that credit for high school, mandatory credit for high school will come into effect. So it would be the 2023, 24 graduating class then that would fall under that provision.
So it sounds like there's a professional development gap that led to teachers not being comfortable teaching the economic portion of civics and economics.
And it's not as in depth as what we're teaching right now. I know there's some standards overlap, but it's not as in depth as what we're doing. And you know this, whenever the legislature a few years ago did the Founding Principles Act,
Right.
and then they threw in economics and financial literacy in it. So there's a give and take, and the lieutenant governor and the General Assembly feel very passionate that economics and financial literacy should be important, and that's why they're saying it shouldn't be buried. Shouldn't be buried into another subject or another course. Sorry.
Ms. White?
Full disclosure, during my teaching career, I had the blessing to teach economics, legal, and political systems. So I cannot tell you how important I feel like this curriculum is for our state. In my present job, I work with at-risk adults who frequently have more month than they have money. And the missing piece is a fundamental misunderstanding about debt, finance, saving, investment, and a simple budget. What comes in must equal what goes out, or else you're in trouble. And so now, working on the back end, I teach financial literacy to adults most Wednesday nights starting in January, and understanding that critical piece. If we could help folks understand even as early as high school, because I keep showing my iPhone, but a non-cash society, a society that is dependent on exchange through, I hate to say Apple Pay or whatever platform, has created a misunderstanding about cost of living, about a contradiction between needs versus wants. So I cannot applaud us enough about putting this back into our standards and providing an opportunity for all students across the state of North Carolina. Most of us are blessed with good training, but we have folks across this state whose families come from poverty, and the structure is not there, and giving that in a high school setting to all students is important.
Dr. Oxendine.
Yes, very good points, Ms. White. Also, Jamie, if you could talk to, and I'm going through this quickly, but I would like, and maybe this topic is rolled into some of the standards, but I'd like to see some thought given to credit. Maybe it's in debt. I don't know.
So that will be in the financial literacy standards. I will send you that link
Okay.
to those. The reason why I pulled out the economics is because a lot of people ask, well, we're already doing this, and the economic standards aren't really, the majority of those aren't in there, so that's why I gave those to you, so you
All
can
right.
see how in depth we're gonna go.
And my final question has to, or point goes to the heart of resources.
Yes.
Anytime we create curricula, we revise it on and on and on, we put our hands on it, teachers get into the, okay, where are the textbooks, where are the digital stuff, on and on.
That's a great question, and thank you for asking. And so first off, there's a financial side of this in the budget, and the money goes towards a $500 stipend for the teachers because they have to either give up their summer, a week of their summer to do it, or if they take it during the school year, because a lot of superintendents said, well, I hire them over the summer, so what are you going to do? That $500 stipend will either go towards them, or if they miss any days of school, it goes towards their subpay. The rest of that money goes towards the professional development, all the resources that they need. And what we've heard, so the North Carolina Council of Economics will package all that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, over $1 million will go towards those resources. But also, what a lot of schools have come to us and said, and superintendents and school districts is, well, we're using EverFi, or with BB&T's thing, or Wells Fargo is a really great partner with us, or Fidelity is a great partner with us. We're saying, keep using those resources. What we're trying to do is get a baseline to train all these teachers and give them all the same equal professional development, so that no student has a different experience when they take this. So there are resources already out there that schools are using, and the resources that the North Carolina Council for Economics is going to provide
Thank
to the
you.
teachers. Sure.
Mr. Ford.
So I have not seen these standards, full disclosure, and in the interest of, I'm thinking now about the students who will be receiving this, and in the interest of equity, so I'm going to raise this, and I know it's going to be controversial, but is there any discussion in these standards about the racial wealth gap and the way wealth is distributed? Because I raise this because the example you gave, those are necessary skills to be able to run your personal finances, to be able to balance your checkbook, and furthermore, if you want to enter entrepreneurship, et cetera. But students of color in particular need to know that even when they do all of these things, even when they have a superior credit score, even when they have exemplary practices, that when they go to apply for a loan, they're still not going to get the same terms as somebody who is white, who has less income and perhaps not as well of a credit score, right? There's a wealth of evidence from renowned economists like Ross Chetty that show the way that economic mobility is distributed in America is racialized, and that it's very, very sticky. And I want to make sure that we're preparing them for the world they're going to go into, right? In the interest of being culturally relevant, but also teach them sound fiscal practices as well. Is there a way we can do both of those things?
This is the legislation as written right now. Ultimately, it'll be a board decision on what you decide collectively on what you want to approve, and you have a year to implement, or sorry, a year to approve anything. These standards don't technically kick in until 2020 freshman class. So I think that's just a discussion you, during your subcommittees, need to have.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you, Jerry.
Mr. Buxton.
First off, I really appreciate the way y'all have built the teacher professional development into this, and I think that's important. Appreciate the focus on the issue, and Ms. White has spoken well for all of us. Mr. Ford, about the importance of the issues. One comment, one question. I'm thankful for, in the FAQ, I'm not sure exactly how it plays out in the legislation about the modularization. I mean, one of the challenges I think we're going to have coming up is not rooting ourselves in the 1950s version of high school where every time we see something important, we create a course. And so the opportunity to think about modularization moving forward, I think is really important. Because when we did early college, the biggest challenge was the existing schedule. And thinking about how you could accelerate kids' learning in 4 to 5 years, given all the stuff that's in there. So I think we've got something that may merit a course, and I think a lot of people have come to that conclusion. Computer science might merit a course down the road. There may be something else we think merits a course as our economy changes and being able to be flexible. So that's just an observation. My first question is, what's a checkbook? I'm just kidding. You said checkbook. You said balance in a checkbook. And
I was
thought,
going to hold my phone up, Mr. Buxton.
what is that thing you're calling a checkbook? My question is, I think that you have put your finger with another number of other folks on the importance of this and kids having this skill. I'm a little concerned by the final exam legislation and the elimination. How do we assess that our kids have in fact learned these skills and our schools are in fact teaching them well? How are we going to know that this course is doing what it needs to do?
I mean, so I guess it's like all other courses, Mr. Buxton, it's going to take time. I mean, there will be testing, even though we're getting rid of, I mean, the teachers still have to test, and we have to have assessments along the way for all of these things. Virginia's doing the same thing. I mean, Virginia is at the place now, they do the best in the nation of anybody, but we don't even have the full, record of what they've done over the last, I guess it's 4 years now. Is it 4 years,
It's
James?
total implementation.
Yeah, since implementation. So, I mean, I think that's always the case, whether we're doing competency-based learning or not. That's still the case.
And Mr. Buxton, I also want to chime in that North Carolina is one of 2 states that did the PISA exam on financial literacy. Us in Massachusetts, we were 11% proficient in the state. Hispanics were 5% proficient, and African Americans were 1% proficient. Right. So, that's where we are right now. So, if you want to, maybe this is a board policy. Maybe the superintendent can petition PISA again to do it as they did before. But once we implement this in 3 years, then ask PISA to come back and see how our students are doing once this is starting to roll. And then maybe, I don't know how often PISA does these tests, but maybe we can set benchmarks out every few years to say, hey, come back and make sure that we're
Here's
progressing.
follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So my concern is if we've got, 450 high schools in the state, plus charter high schools, and we have 450 different tests of this course, and they're all locally made tests. I'm worried we're not going to get a very good assessment of if this really critical content matter is being taught well and kids are learning at high levels. So instead of having a clear assessment that is high quality and high schools are using across the state and we know where they're doing well and our kids are in fact getting these skills, to Ms. White's point, we got to have something. And so that's just a concern given other conversations going on about things like final exams that kind of tie our hands when we try to look at implementation of important stuff. So we can't fix that here, but I just raise that as, that could undermine this effort if we're not careful.
Okay, final question on this topic, Dr. Oxendine.
Just a suggestion tied to your point about accountability in terms of knowing something at the end of the day, end of the course. This might be an opportunity for us to think about competency-based assessments in this course. So we come up with specific skill sets, project-based learning. I think it would be pretty exciting to think about competency-based in a course like this. Just on the table.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else, Senator Gilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Holden?
Perfect tee up there. I'll get back to the bills that have not quite made crossover, but I'll jump into one that is competency-based assessments. House Bill 714 has gotten some press out there, and then also in the House budget is competency-based math and some funding for that. But this particular House bill would direct the State Board of Education to recommend steps necessary to transition to a competency-based and teaching model, a competency-based assessment and teaching model for all elementary and secondary students in North Carolina. I'll keep you posted on where that goes, but that's a high-profile bill, so thank you for teeing me right into my next talking points. Another high-profile bill has been Senate Bill 219, and this is on modifying teacher licensure requirements. That bill has been through a series of different iterations, and the one that was in committee most recently, as in yesterday, had taken quite a bit of stakeholder input, and the bill had been modified pretty significantly. This bill is focused on the districts who are experiencing hard-to-fill teaching positions. So they're trying to create a different pathway for those teachers who are having difficulty in passing the required exam. This bill would allow a 3-year license to align with the 3 years to pass the test, which was on the state board agenda. So that is included in here, and that's easier for tracking purposes specifically, because currently you've got a 3-year license but 2 years to be able to pass the test. So this would align those two. In addition, what this would do is it would create a 3-year non-renewable license for teachers who are having difficulty in passing the exam. And so in the last version, it was actually a renewable license, so they could literally retire with a continuing license in that way. This particular one would be for those who haven't been able to pass the test, but it would require, the affidavit is still in there. It would require your superintendent and your principal to sign an affidavit, and then the local board would submit for the licensure on there. One piece that I'll point out, I'm still trying to confirm, but the version that I saw in committee yesterday did not have the tiers in there. The online version this morning still does, so I've requested a current version of that bill to make sure that what I reviewed yesterday does no longer have the tiers in there in terms of being able to restrict this to the certain tiers in the state.
Another point we discussed yesterday, I hope, off, side conversation, I hope that we can make sure that in that law, in the bill, that there is a condition that the teacher continues attempting to pass the test.
It is in there.
It is?
Yes, I did look at that, thank you. It would be that they would, I think the word is encouraged to continue to seek
Encouraged,
that. But at least it's not renewable ongoing, so they would have essentially 6 years at that point. The next bill is Senate Bill 354, Student Notice Charter School Closure. And the intent behind this bill is to ensure that parents and key stakeholders have an opportunity to be heard by the state board and the Charter School Advisory Board prior to a school not getting renewed. And so this bill, as it's currently written, requires a public hearing for any school that's not going to be renewed. So we're working with the bill sponsor to try to get some tweaks in there. And in addition, it would require some additional work from our charter school office, who, as you all know, is short-staffed. We have almost doubled the number of charter schools since 2013, but we still have the same number of staff. So that's something that we're working through. I'm going to jump real quickly for the purpose of time here. There's another bill that is Senate Bill 522 that I'll bring to your attention. It's a charter school, I'm going to call it an omnibus bill. It has quite a bit of information and changes in there as it pertains to charters. Another one is the classroom supplies to teachers. This was a bill that was high profile for the state board last month. I'm pleased to say that there is $15 million additional in the House version of the budget, and only that $15 million would be what is used for the going directly into the hands of the teachers, and the rest would remain as is in the current allotment. I've spoken on the competency-based assessment, but the last one I'll touch on is House Bill 798, low-performing schools. This bill is an early version of the work group that was working around the modifications to the ISD legislation. So we're working with the bill sponsor. This came out on the House side. We do have a placeholder through a Senate side bill that we're hoping to get the final version from the work group. It was with extensive work ongoing over the last several months, and so we're hoping to be able to bring the House version and the Senate version together, but this would certainly get us towards that continuum of services model around the ISD legislation. And then before I close, what I'll do is just share with you that I've got Alexis Schaus, who's going to share some real top-level highlights in terms of what was included in the House budget this week. And then we won't spend too much time on it because, as you know, it can quickly change in the Senate side. But with that, I'll turn it over to Alexis unless somebody has any questions for me.
Ms. Godwin.
I just wanted to ask about a particular one that caught my attention a couple of months back, the K-3 Reading and Literacy Improvement Act. It was Senate Bill 329, House Bill 428. which would appropriate funds for local administrative units to have instructional assistants in every kindergarten class, through second grade classroom and a full-time teacher assistant, for every third grade classroom, or every three, classroom. Did that die in committee?
Lisa, I have not, I don't have a lot of recent information on it, so I'm gonna go back and look and give you an update. I'll update the board afterwards. Can you give me those bill numbers for me?
Yeah, Senate Bill 329 and House Bill 428. That was a
Okay.
very exciting thing that I saw and was really hopeful about, and I haven't seen anything else about it lately, so,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holden. Ms. Schaus?
Thank you. Cecilia asked me to just give some high level on the money report as well as some of the special provisions associated with that. You were provided it's two documents that we do as a matter of course to help the school districts kind of navigate through the process. There is a comparison document that shows the state board's requests, the governor's recommended budget, as well as the House budget as it is right now. They are in draft. And then a kind of reference guide of the special provisions for the House only. So, and I do blend the money with the special provisions, so it's all in one document. With that, the main items I'm going to talk about are the salary for teachers and instructional support. An unusual item related to this is that the teachers will receive a experience step increase between July 1 and December 31st, and that will give, depending on where you are on the salary schedule, that will be either a $0 increase or $2,000 increase. And then effective January 1, 2020, the salary schedule is replaced with an increased salary schedule that affects the steps that are 16 years and above. And so the combined increase of the step and the increase in the salary schedule, depending on which years of experience you are, is between $500 at 1% or $8,500 at 16.3%. So that's kind of an initial assessment of where that is. In addition, the special provisions reinstates master's and graduate level pay. That includes advanced and doctorate. And there is no in-field requirement, as you may have seen in language before. So some teachers that have their master's degree and were not eligible under the current law would now be eligible to receive an additional 10% or the advanced or doctorate pay. So that would obviously increase their pay also. The school counselors currently, you may not be aware, but school psychologists, audiologists, speech-language pathologists are paid 5 steps above their other instructional support personnel. And the special provision moves the school counselors onto that schedule. That, I believe, are the items related to teachers' instructional support. Related to the assistant principals that are tied to this teacher's schedule, so they receive any increases that the teachers receive flow through to the assistant principal schedule, and they would receive that step increase until January 1, where they would receive the teacher increases plus a 1% differential. So currently, assistant principals at the A schedule plus 19%. Effective January 1, that would go to A plus 20%. The principal schedules, they were they were totally overhauled last year or 2 years ago. And the change here is really to put the principals on a base schedule that is tied to their years of experience and tied to the assistant principal and the principal and the teacher scale. So they would receive a base of the A schedule plus 25%, and then there would be an additional amount of pay based on the size of the school and their 3-year history of the growth of the school that they supervised. And that additional pay ranges between $2,000 and $18,000. So there would be various changes to the principal depending on how many years of experience they have and size of its school, etc. It also adds a new range. Currently, the school size is capped at 1,300 students, and it would add a new range of 1,600 student schools. So, principals that are in larger schools would have additional pay. Going on to some of the a couple of items also included in the money report. I wanted also to mention that the bill also includes a signing bonus for new teachers in small counties. And there is if you look at the budget bill, you'll see a lot of language on the teacher bonuses. That actually is a consolidation of like the last 4 years of various changes to put it in one place. So there is no impact on that. The textbook and digital resources, there was a continuation of the non-recurring funding. So there was $10 million in non-recurring plus 1.3 in recurring. That does not have a significant impact on the total appropriations. And in the second year, it does decrease it. They did provide a definition and a change of name for the textbook and digital resources to instructional materials and supplemental materials, two different definitions, and the impact on that is that it would allow school districts to purchase devices out of those textbook and digital resource. It would also put the responsibility of textbook adoption at the LEA level as opposed to at the state level. The instructional supplies, Cecilia mentioned the change related to this. Previously, the language was at $400 per teacher. This $15 million of non-recurring funds provides the funding for that North Carolina Classroom Supply Program at $145 per teacher, regardless of their funding source. And it also provides some funding for DPI to train the teachers. The funding is the Renewal School District and other entities, other independent public schools such as charter schools, lab schools, etc., may participate in this program, but the funds are restricted to the program. So in order to receive the funding, you have to participate in the program. The final item is the school safety grants. There was additional funding for the school mental health grant and some change in language which expands the professionals that can be approved to be paid out of that grant. The significant item with the school safety grants is really in the second year of the biennium, where a lot of the funding is increased significantly. You'll see a lot of the funding for the school safety equipment grant, the training grant, and this crisis grant are actually held at the same for this next fiscal year, but the following year after that, there is significant funding going into those to expand those grant programs. An item for charter schools would be allowed to be included in that school safety equipment grant. Currently, they are excluded because they do not have government. For the government-owned buildings, the school mental health grant, it does require a local match, which was not there previously. So it would be one local dollar for every $2 of state associated with that. I believe those are the main items. There was significant funding for the business modernization project, as well as the advanced data analytics section within DPI. The majority of that particular section money coming in the second year of the biennium. And then the charter school data management, that came into it as an amendment, so people may not have realized that. With that, we have to take questions.
Thank you, Ms. Schaus and Ms. Holden. In order to keep us moving, I'm going to invite my colleagues to connect with the two of you individually, knowing that this is a continuing, evolving series of events, but we appreciate the update and the information to the board. Thank you. As you know, the statutes establish training requirements for the board, and we participate in issue sessions to fulfill that statutory duty of listening and discussing matters that may have policy implications. Today, we have an opportunity to explore equity in practice, and I'll turn to our chair of our Strategic Planning Committee, Mr. Ford, for this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. James Ford. I have the privilege of serving as chair of the Strategic Planning Committee alongside Ms. Jill Kamitz and other committee members. Initially, we were going to hear from a representative from the Maryland State Department of Education about their equity plan. However, she was unable to attend, and so in order to mitigate that, we're going to ask Mrs. Allison Reedon to step in her stead and do her best to represent some of the work based upon research of the Maryland State Department of Education. So, Mrs. Reddin?
Okay. All right, good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Lieutenant Governor Forrest, and Superintendent Johnson, and members of the board. I am very excited to be here with y'all today. Sorry I'm not Kim Johnson from Maryland, but next best thing, what kind of teacher would I be if I wasn't ready to come up and jump in and do something for y'all? So, a few months ago, Dr. Townsend Smith and I engaged in a process of looking at strategic plans in a handful of different states, particularly looking at the equity work that they've done. And we found Maryland's work to be very inspired, and we wanted to share that with you all today. So I'm pretty sure that you all have seen these slides before. I believe Dr. Townsend Smith has sent them out to y'all, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at them. But I'm just going to kind of go through Maryland's equity journey. I will say up front that I am no expert in Maryland education, but if there are questions, I'm more than happy to do everything that I can to find an answer for y'all. So, starting in 2016, Maryland started kind of their equity journey with a piece of policy around multicultural education, and it was then amended by the Maryland State Board of Education. In February 2017, they withdrew that multicultural piece of policy and used the CCSSO Leading for Equity document to help inform their new policy around educational equity, which was put in place in December 2018. There we go. So this is a quote from their plan, that the new educational equity regulations establish equity as a priority, not only for the Maryland State Department of Education, but also for all of the local school systems across the state. Just some key points here. Maryland made equity a matter of both policy and priority, which is evident in the work that they've done, which we're going to look at their strategic plan in a couple minutes. But every single LEA is required to have an equity plan in place. It also not only trickles down from the state board to LEAs, but also their state agency. So every single actor in every public agency has a commitment to equity and pushing that work forward in their state. And y'all, please stop me if you have questions or anything like that. So, or if I'm going too fast or something. Maryland State Department of Education also has an Equity Assurance and Compliance Office. So it's within their Chief Operating Officer's division. But that office essentially ensures that the plans that LEAs submit are appropriate. They make sure that entities are compliant to their equity measures or their equity plans. They work with the LEAs and also with other departments within their state agency.
Ms. Brett, I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course.
So they have a person in their Department of Education who is housed in another office, but that person is responsible for overseeing essentially the
So
statewide
they have a
equity work.
director who is in charge of equity assurance and compliance. And so there's like they have a nice little org chart. If you click on the link, at the bottom of the page, I linked the Equity Assurance and Compliance Office website there. So they have a nice little org chart that shows under the Office of the Deputy for Finance that the Equity Assurance and Compliance Office is under that kind of umbrella, if you will. And there is a director who runs that equity office. Yeah. Before we jump into what Maryland's doing with their strategic plan, I did think it was important to talk about Maryland's equity definition and other definitions that surround equity. I compared them across with the CCSSO revision of their definition of equity, which again, I mentioned a couple moments ago that Maryland used the CCSSO Leading for Equity document as a resource as they crafted their equity policy. And so you can see here the three definitions, CCSSO, Maryland in the middle, and then the North Carolina definition that we've revised that we talked a little bit about the other day at the planning and work session. So here on this slide, it's the same word, same thing, but I wanted to kind of pull out some highlights to compare the language in the definitions. So all of the words that are in bold are word for word similarities, like exactly the same thing. And then anything that's italicized in the Maryland or North Carolina definitions are similar in concept, but maybe aren't exactly word for word. But you can see that there is a lot of similarity across these definitions. And some of the work that Dr. Townsend Smith and I have done in looking at other states and their definitions as well outside of Maryland, a lot of those states with successful equity plans have used the CCSSO revision or something like it to push their work forward as well. Some other equity-related definitions that come straight from the Maryland State Department of Education's website. They specifically talk about accountability measures as they pertain to their equity work. So guaranteeing oversight opportunities, resources, and educational rigor that will lead to achievement for all students. They highlight educational opportunities as well, which I feel like their definition of all students have access to rigorous, well-rounded academic programs and experiences that enrich their educational career is very similar to a lot of the things that we've talked about, especially this week in our spring planning and work session with what the opportunity gap means and what it means to make sure that every child can have a wonderful education here in North Carolina. And then that last piece that they define is an equity lens. And we're going to actually take a look at their equity lens card right now. So the Maryland Association of Boards of Education put together this equity lens card. So for any policy, program, practice, decision, or action, the Maryland Association of Boards of Education created 5 questions or 5, kind of series of questions that the State Board of Education and other entities within or who are working in the public school sector in Maryland should be asking. I know Mr. Ford has experienced using an equity lens card, something maybe similar to this. And so we're hoping that we'll be able to adopt something similar as well. These questions are just kind of guides to make sure that we're focused on equity in all of the decisions that we make and the conversations that we have. I think it was Mr. Ford yesterday who talked about that relationship between standards and what a teacher is teaching. And so these are kind of like the essential questions that a teacher might have in his or her classroom. So now I just want to take a brief moment to look at Maryland's strategic plan. This is their nice little graphic. I'm a sucker for a good graphic. So at the heart of their plan, they want to narrow the gap. And they want to do that with through 3 different components. So they want to do that through early childhood, the secondary transition, and then the biggest part of their circle is that access, equity, and progress piece. So the access, equity, and progress piece is one of their three main action imperatives, if you will. And so this is just a statement directly from their plan about what that means to them. So they want by 2020 to implement effective, equitable, and culturally responsive education services for every student across Maryland. Also in Maryland's strategic plan, they have their measures of success, which is very much similar to the conversations we had yesterday about metrics. So I just thought it was interesting and noticed looking back at their plan the other day that every single one of their measures of success has a baseline attached to it. And I think that's really interesting because one of the things that I know we had talked about yesterday when we were looking at metrics was that some of the things that we have don't have a baseline. And so we should maybe start trying to collect information so that we can have a baseline. But I also noticed that there were some similarities in how Maryland was measuring equity in education. So they specifically call out looking at discipline disparities across race and ethnicity. And they're also calling out in their measures of success gaps by race and ethnicity in proficiency, as well as looking at disproportionate rates of students who are placed in special education services. So these are Maryland's implementation strategies, specifically from their strategic plan, strategic collaboration, family partnerships, evidence-based practice, data-informed decision-making, and professional learning, all of which I feel like as the strategic planning committee has met and talked through the last few months, like we are definitely striving to get to these places as far as strategies go. And there are strategies that we have talked about for our strategic plan, but we haven't necessarily shared all of those quite yet because we feel like as long as we have the goals and then the objectives and the metrics all nailed down, then we can really start getting into strategies, especially because we feel as a committee that the strategies piece can be very context-based and very localized. So just a few questions to consider that I think Mr. Ford and Ms. Kamnitz will potentially talk about at the end of this presentation. But there are a few questions that we should think about as we learn from Maryland and their journey. The first question is just, are we expecting that the strategic plan work will trickle down to local boards of education to instill in their own equity and safety regulations? Another question to consider is how will departments across DPI and our own state agency implement a focus on equity that's reflective of the board's mission, vision, and guiding principles? We heard a little bit from Dr. Petrie Martin the other day also about the DPI equity plan and how it's embedded in ESSA. And so what will that look like as we move forward with the statewide strategic plan with the board? And then just another consideration, going back to Mr. Ford's question as well, should the board consider the benefits of instilling an equity office, or what could that conversation even look like as we begin to carry out this work even more? This is just a list of all of the links to everything that I looked at as I went through and put this presentation together. All of them are linked, so you can just click on it and it'll take you directly to the Maryland website page that I was looking at. And then, do you have any questions that hopefully I could answer?
Thank you for that, Mrs. Redden. You're not Ms. Johnson, but you did a good job.
I'm not, yes, thank you.
Board members, if you have any questions, and then also if I could add, is there a way we can upload the slideshow? I know it's up there now. Okay, well, my mistake. You guys doing a great job. Continue. Any questions, board members? Any thoughts?
Quick question.
Duncan.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. You've got it.
Go ahead, Dr. Oxton.
Thank you. My question is this, Mr. Ford, I applaud this effort. Help me understand the difference between an officer of equity and an officer that, or an employee that would oversee affirmative action.
This is my interpretation, right? So I think that just on its face, the difference between affirmative action and equity is I think that affirmative action would be like just one strategy, and whereas equity is more of a holistic philosophical approach. But that to me feels like that's one singular programmatic intervention, whereas equity is more of you heard a lens or a concept of parity and fairness that should be embedded through every aspect, everything from not just your students, but your resource allocation, your vending practices. And I think that goes far beyond just making sure that we incorporate race in affirmative action.
What I'd like to see us do if we move in this direction is to take I don't want to use deeper dive, we'd kill that phrase. I want us to take a look, this would take some time, to look at all policies within the agency, out of C&I, out of HR, out of teacher effectiveness, licensure, and so on, and see special education especially, EC, IDEA, and see where we have existing requirements, regulations, laws, policy that get to equity, and maybe have them in a column. It's a way to check and make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to be. I'm thinking of LRE, least restrictive environment, and special education. See, to me, that gets at the heart, that begins to dice it out in terms of equity, making sure that we have kids in the right placement. See what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's very complicated work.
I don't want to use the term audit, but it almost feels like an equity audit of some sort, right? Just kind of doing an inventory of all the policies and then combing through those things, making sure that they represent the principle of equity, right? And kind of holding a light to those things and seeing what fits and what comports, and then also what does not. I think that's a really sound suggestion.
Mr. Duncan?
Could you go back to the things to consider slide for a
Yeah,
minute?
of course.
Thank you. On the first question was, is the strategic plan work expected to trickle down to the local boards of education? And the last one was, should the board consider the benefits of installing an equity office? So a couple thoughts. If we're really going to implement equity as a main strategic objective as part of a strategic plan of the board, I'd be hard pressed to see how we could do it without having an office of equity in some form. I think we would need to discuss in a meaningful way how that could be most effective, but I think it would be important to do that. And then the interesting issue is there are several of our larger districts that already have
Yes.
equity offices and officers within the districts. And so the sense of, should we encourage them to do it, you could argue they're ahead of us in some respects on that particular issue. And what they have tended to do, from what I've been able to observe, is, among other things, what we were just talking about, aligning policies and looking for where there would be issues relating to equity in any policies that exist within the district. But beyond that, in a lot of these districts, there are issues that arise specific to incidents that occur within the county, or issues that arise in terms of data that's driving data that requires professional development. And so they're instrumental in following up on how to best handle those, both with students and with professional staff. And so the further question for us might be, if that's on a local level in a number of places, what is it we would be asking the equity office to do here at the state level, and how will that mesh if in fact we're looking to in fact work together with the LEAs? So I think those are all interesting questions to raise.
And you all are going to have the opportunity at the June meeting to hear from one of those local or district-wide equity offices. So the Wake County Office of Equity Affairs will be here in June to share what they're doing and how they're doing it and everything like that. So hopefully that'll lead to more good questions.
Ms. Campbell?
A couple questions. To the first question there, in Maryland, did they require the LEAs to be a part of this work? And was that through policy or?
So when they release this plan or this policy in December 2018, they said by the start of next school year, every LEA will have an equity plan in place. It was a pretty quick turnaround, but it's also a very small state. So I think they only have 24 school districts in Maryland.
I did
So
notice that,
yeah.
quite a bit fewer, yes. So easier to do the
Yeah.
communication piece. And the other question that I sort of, and James, I may be jumping ahead of you here, but one of the things we've talked about in the group that I'd like to sort of throw out is I think it's important that we all feel comfortable with the definition of equity that's critical to the work. And we've done some talk about, do we need to have a list, as the current draft has, of the groups that we're talking about versus just a simple statement that we're talking about each and every child that I think Stephen Pruitt sort of referred to when he talked to us last month. So I don't know, any comments on that? I'd be
I
interested.
think that's worth
in
discussion. So if we have if y'all have any thoughts on that, I think it's worth discussing. Feelings on the equity definition as it stands right now
You-
from the,
Back up there.
I have another question that goes, maybe, it's a plus question. Okay, I'm confused about something. Are we talking about equity in terms of students, opportunities, access? Are we talking about equity in a broader sense to include educators, access? Is this focused equity only on the student?
I think the simple answer is no. When, as it's, so I happen to know goal 3.1 because I spent 45 minutes looking over it yesterday. But when we talk about increasing educators of color, that is both something that I think provides equity of access for students, but also for teachers as well. Also internally, making sure that the experiences. So what I think is interesting about the Maryland model is that the equity is both inward facing, so the organization entity itself has to be practicing equity, right? It has to be equitable in its practices and in the way that it functions, but then it's also outward facing in the way that it deals with the LEAs. But it goes to me back to the concept, charity starts at home, right, and spreads abroad. You can't possibly with any credibility promote the message of fairness and of parity, and then internally all of your systems, your practices, your policies themselves don't produce equity for your staff or for other folks who work internally. To me, that would just seem to be problematic.
Having a clear focus target is important in the definition then.
That's good. Any thoughts, board members, on the definition? Are we good? Okay.
We've had a lot of discussion about it when we had our work session. We talked about the idea of every and the idea of all being inclusive, and that making a list opens ourselves up to the fact that we may possibly have left someone off. And if you think you should be thinking about the question, if you did establish an Office of Equity, that those items in that list then become a rubric or a metric. And so any one of those items that are listed then become, I'm a female, is there equity for female? And then Mr. Davis might have a disability. And he's going to come to you and say, well, and so it becomes a measurement for every single one of those things. And is it doable? Is it achievable? Is it, is there an accountability? So I would go back to our Declaration of Independence, and I go back to our Pledge of Allegiance. And justice for all. And I believe that our nation believes that, and justice for all.
So I think you raise a very good issue, and that is, how do we live up to that? And then also the fear of potentially leaving someone behind. One thing from our presentation yesterday or the day before, I think from Dr. Tammy Howard, gave kind of a history on the legislation that we have not called it that, but it is equity legislation. So the Elementary Secondary Education Act, and so a lot of these groups that we're talking about are themselves protected classes in federal education legislation. They're included in No Child Left Behind. They're included in Every Student Succeeds Act. So to an extent, there's already a precedent for protecting these particular groups. And so I don't think we'd be veering too far off course there as much as we'd be staying in line. My apprehension, and I laugh because, to use the same example, the reason why I'm apprehensive to not use or spell out the exact groups is because you take, for instance, the Declaration of Independence. My people were not included in that all definition, right? So in principle, it sounded like a very ambitious idea, but it did not include African Americans as part of the definition of every man being created equal. And so it becomes imperative to be very targeted in our speech. Even if we risk potentially not including folks, I think it's fair for us to say, you know, we're going to make mistakes, we're human. But what I don't want to do is to allow history to repeat itself in the sense of being too broad and not necessarily capturing anybody, so to speak.
Good point. But you can fast forward to speeches that were made in the 60s and new groups that have been populated since those groups that fall under that same evaluation. Dr. Martin Luther King had no idea that we would have an LBGT community that we would need to be sensitive to, and making sure that our classroom instruction is culturally relevant. So probably my mistake for bringing something to the table that was relevant in the 1700s that has changed as our population in the United States has changed. So point taken. But I think even 10 years from now, we could say that we would need to amend that list. Perhaps. Because we don't know what's coming. Perhaps. So all and every, capture it.
I just want to add to that is that I do know that Maryland does require not annual. I think every couple years they do have to revise their definition, and they do sit and have a conversation around what do we need to change? Have we left anyone out? I guess in this case, right? And so there is a process that they go through to, they have a plan I think it is 3 years. All LEAs also have to look at their plan every 3 years and say, does this still feel right? So,
Ms. Kamitz.
Just to back it up a little bit, do you have any insight in the conversations that you all have had with their decision to try and make the list? And was there any discussion, do you know, about that? And because I noticed that CCSSO also does spell it out.
I don't have any insider info on the conversations around how they got to that point, but I can say that after looking at a handful of other states and how they define equity, a lot of the states with fully functioning plans right now that are active and seem to be working, I think this is still a little new. But of all of the states that we looked at, most of those states with functioning functioning equity plans mirror their equity definition from the CCSSO definition.
Just for clarity,
Yeah.
CCSO is
The Chief Council of State School Officers. Thank you, everybody.
I have just one thing I'd like to raise, if I could. Ms. Holden, if you mentioned this, I apologize already. There's a bill that got filed last week called the Opportunity Task Force Bill. It's House Bill 895. And I don't know where this is going or not, but this is surprising because it's bipartisan, and it's a task force that is created to study the opportunity gap, consider effective approaches and best practices to close the opportunity gap in K-12, and it does list out many of the groups we're talking about. So we're talking about all your subgroups: race, ethnicity, socioeconomic, gender, language proficiency, urban and rural. And if that's any indication, right. If they can, depending on where this goes, that people are already starting to think about this across the mall. And I feel like we're in a good place, and there may be some synergies where we can actually start to impact change for these students in North Carolina. That makes me a little bit hopeful.
Yeah, and I know in that bill, some of those things that task force specifically wants to work on are very much aligned to the things that we've talked about with our strategic plan. So looking at best practice with equity in education, looking at professional development, looking at discipline disparities, effective use of data to reduce opportunity gaps, access to effective educators, access to rigorous coursework, access to effective school leaders, innovative budgeting systems. So I do feel like there is a lot of opportunity to extend a hand with that work.
Mr. Ford, just one thought on this. You're going to get to a list whether you do it in policy or administratively. And I think back to, I think it was the bullying legislation and something that the board had to define years ago, and this board wrestling with a list or all. The problem when you say all is if you then say, we'll deal with males and females, because that's everybody. You can define it the way you want when you don't have a list. So frankly, I'm comfortable if it would said all in our policy, but we will get to a list somewhere, because then as the department goes through and operationalizes the equity focus and lens, and we start looking at who's achieving and who's not, the question will be, how granular do we get in that? And there will be administrative decisions and board decisions about how granular. So we'll get to a list at some point, and the question is, to me, is whether you do it in policy or administration. But I would just say to my fellow board members, we'll get to a list at some point. That will be in a kind of a public expression of our own values about who we count in all. And I would say you can't dodge it by just putting all. At some point, we're going to be asked who we mean by all.
Dr. Oxendown?
Then this is my final point, so I'll talk for 30 minutes. I'm kidding. No, but you hit on a very sensitive trigger word, whom we value. I know there's a pragmatic side to having a list, a very practical, operational side, but whom we value will send up flares. I think in our effort, our best intent and best spirit of humankind, we try not to offend and exclude, but invariably we will. And we won't be intentional about it. I won't, we won't. So this is complex work, folks. Because I might say, make sure Lumbeys are on the list, and make sure the Tuscarora band in Robinson County, made up of 21 people, because they're going to be mighty upset. They're not on the list. It's tough work, noble work.
Any other thoughts, board members? Superintendent?
Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes. Oh, Lisa.
I just gotta put a little heart into this, as a teacher. My face does not reflect the faces of all of my students, and that hurts me, it pains me, so I'm very conscious of that. And so as I teach, I try to make sure that at least my instruction reflects who they are as a person. And I think as educators, if we always remember that our hearts and our souls are the same color, that are the same value, then we can't go wrong. But I think that the work that this board is doing is so awesome. And, I've got one more month to go with y'all. And I can't wait to see what you do as you move forward. This is meaningful work. So thank you from children and, from their perception of what you're doing and from educators as well.
Thank you for that, Ms. Godwin. Well, Mr. Chair, I think that concludes this portion, unless we have any other questions for Ms. Redden. Thank you again, Ms. Redden. You did an excellent
Yeah, no
job
problem.
standing in.
She did.
So, I don't know why I should be, but I'm always amazed at what this group does. And this was just a classic example, and I wish Ms. White was here to hear this. I appreciate that we bring such a diverse group, and we're reminding ourselves of not to exclude anyone. I appreciate the pragmatic statement, Mr. Buxton, but I don't think Ms. White made a mistake. In my view, what she touched on is the essence of what it means to be an American.
That's right.
And that our definition of all continues to expand. It now includes women, includes African Americans, includes Italians, on and on. And I think our purpose, one of our purposes is to continue that definition to expand and to include all. So, Mr. Wallace.
And you just touched on something, and I would be remiss if I didn't say this, because Ms. White really did hit on something when she mentioned Dr. King. And one of his most renowned speeches is all of God's children, black men, white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics. And yes, LGBT had not came into the fold at that time. So, I mean, she definitely hit on something with the all. And that was the origins of it. But as you know, we evolve from our definitions as the world changes. So as I echo the sentiments of Lisa and all my colleagues, this board is special. It's a courageous board. You tackle the tough topics that everybody else shuns from. They really do. They just say, oh, we'll get that. They just kick the bottle down the road. And then we just keep going, and we just keep going, and we keep going. But this board does not. That's a courageous board. That's why I'm just honored to serve with you. And I would have been remiss not to say that.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Mr. Duncan?
If I could just say one thing about why doing equity is so important, and this doesn't begin to touch all the reasons, but if we go back to as basic a thing as how do we advance the education of our children, which is our primary task is to advance the education of our children. And if we did disaggregate the data on a lot of our end-of-year tests, and if we disaggregate the data on some of the ACT tests, we often want to say it's difficult for schools that are in poverty, and there's no question it is, that the socioeconomic challenges are real. But we often tend to stop there and not go further. And unless we start going further, then we're not going to resolve all the issues, because if you break down some of the testing data, you'll find that non-free and reduced lunch African American students score lower than free and reduced lunch white students on some of the ACT subject matter and some of the final exams. That's more than socioeconomic status, that's race. And if we don't take on this issue as an equity issue, and if we don't address it as a state and as a board, then we're really fully failing in our obligation to our kids, and that's one place we can't fail.
That's right. Absolutely. Okay, thank you. I'll now turn to the superintendent for your report to the board.
Thank you, and it's pretty brief this month because, well, one of my favorite things to do is to get out across the state and visit schools. We have been very busy here in Raleigh working with the General Assembly as they prepare the two-year budget. We did make it to Holly Grove Middle School for a pep rally. I think you've probably heard a lot about these students who actually, they won the first round of the competition for their innovative design that actually gets the stop arm flashing 400 feet before the bus comes to a stop. This is a neat little bit of technology that they put together. They actually won the grand prize as well. They went up to New York City and they got to, I talked to them, they got to stay in Manhattan, they went and presented. It was not just impressive what they came up with, but also impressive how they had to present this to the panel of judges. But they ended up winning the grand prize, and right here from Wake County, we were able to go and cheer them on at the whole school pep rally that they had. This was just a picture from speaking to the Skills USA conference. One of my favorite things to do is to go speak to conferences of student groups because we really like to encourage them and let students who are already so active in planning for their future and getting the skills they need, whether it be HOSA, which is for the healthcare industry students who are, some of them are planning the long road to being doctors, are at Skills USA, where they're about to go into a competition the next day where they're framing a house, and they're going to go right into that industry. And one thing I love about Skills USA is always when there's this competition, there are students who are getting job offers on the spot, on the floor of the competition. So it's always a pleasure to be able to go say congratulations to them. And of course, we were very grateful for right down there in Harnett County, Principal Pierce and Mr. Love and their students all worked together to put together the North Carolina Easter egg. I really appreciated the way Mr. Love handled this. He actually had students make their own designs using the symbols of the state, and then he helped put one master design together, and they came up with a beautiful egg design. And you can't, it's hard to see on the screen, but it's in the presentation. I definitely appreciated on the road. If you can see, there's definitely a NASCAR stock car racing right through the middle of the Easter egg. And as a reminder, we loved the one last year too, which was just a picture of a box turtle, because the students just thought that the fact that our state turtle is the box turtle was fantastic. And so really always a pleasure that we get to do that with students. Here are two previous Teachers of the Year and our new Teacher of the Year. Thank you to the board members who were able to join us for that, and staff. That's always a bittersweet moment where you have to say that there can only be one North Carolina Teacher of the Year, but we always do let all the regional finalists know that we are grateful for all of them in their service, and that it is a bittersweet moment. We never pick a winner. It's just this year that one particular Teacher of the Year happens to be Miss Morris. And I'm very excited as well because this is just by coincidence. One of her passions is STEM. And I think we're going to try to do some things with her next year about getting the message out that STEM is for everyone starting at an early age. So we're excited about that work. I'm going to connect her with Mary Hemphill, who now is leading our computer science efforts as well. So it's very exciting. Here's a picture of the regional finalists. This is in your presentation. I will not read every school, but we did want to give a shout out formally to the Magnet Schools of Excellence. You see we have them in Charlotte, Mac, Durham, Forsyth, and of course a lot right here in Wake County. Cabarrus, and more in Durham. And more in Charlotte, and more in Wake. I think this is the last one. Chairman Davis and I just spoke at the Bridge Conference, which was hosted by Ed and C. We had a great panel talking about the connections between early childhood all the way into post-secondary, and I know that's work that this board is going to focus on a lot as well going into next year. All right, thank you.
Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll be back in session at 10:40. Okay. We're back in session, and we now come to our special recognitions, the time on our agenda, which is probably the most enjoyable part of our agenda, when we recognize significant awards, proclamations, resolutions, and those who make a difference in the lives of public school students each day. Keeping Whole Child in mind, today, in the first time in 4 years, North Carolina practitioners have been awarded the prestigious title of School Psychologist of the Year, and one has received a Lifetime Achievement Award. And I'll now call on Ms. Dreama McCoy for these introductions. Ms. McCoy?
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Dreama McCoy with the Department of Public Instruction, with supporting teaching and related services under the Exceptional Children Division. And I'm here representing our Dr. Maria Petrie Martin, our Deputy Superintendent, and Sherry Thomas, our State Exceptional Children Director. And so what I'd like to say is this is just an honor, really. And, you know, our state is known for being the first in flight, but there's the first that's going to happen or has happened within our state with this presentation. And so on behalf of that, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn McCord, our state school psychology consultant. And so she will begin her presentation. And we've got a few people who are still coming up from downstairs. One of them is our recordee, but it's okay, and we'll move forward until she gets here. All right. She's here. Yes, right in the nick of time. And this is an honor and a privilege, and this is an awesome time. So I'm going to turn it over to Lynn.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman, board members. I appreciate this opportunity. Yes, we had some people, school psychology has a very tight schedule, and so they're going to do everything they can before they can get here this morning. One of our award recipients was driving in from Charlotte, so they're here. And I want to start off by just expressing how pleased I am to be able to stand before you today. My name is Lynn McCord, as Dreama stated. I am a trained and licensed school psychologist. I practiced in the southwest part of this state for many years before coming in to the Department of Public Instruction. So I'm within the Exceptional Children's Division, and I am assigned to school psychology and traumatic brain injury. So thank you for this opportunity. I am going to express how pleased I am to stand before you to recognize our two distinguished school psychologists this year and give you a little bit of a backstory, as well as some real recognition that North Carolina received at our national convention this year. The work of school psychology is often misunderstood. However, it runs very deep. It can be very heavy at times, and it requires a very high level of thoughtfulness and precision in decision making so that we can support our school teams in getting things right for the students that we're serving, so then the families and the instructional staff can move forward and actually doing things right instructionally for those students. Many of those students are our most marginalized students in our subgroups. Most often are students with disabilities. And so given this depth and brevity of our work, we understand it well, but we also take the opportunity to celebrate when there is a time to celebrate. And so I just want to say that I'm equally pleased to know that we have actually I'm not sure if they're all here, but we have over 20 to 25 school psychologists from across our state who have recognized the importance of this recognition. And to get a school psychologist to change their calendar at this time of the year to actually get here, and you have to understand how important it is, because it is just nearly impossible to get them out of their schedules and knowing what time constraints they're working under on May 2nd. So I'm equally pleased to see that, and I'm not sure if they're all here, but we have practitioners in Raleigh today that have come from different regions of our state, not just the North Central region. We have school psychology trainers from our universities that are here today, and we also have some school psychology leaders. So if you don't mind, I would like to ask those that are in the room to please stand and be recognized as well. School psychologists. So, 2 months ago, during our annual convention of the National Association of School Psychologists, this was held in Atlanta, and we have an audience typically of over 5,000 participants at our national convention. North Carolina enjoyed a much needed and very much underscored pronounced presence at this convention. Within our discipline, it's hard to imagine that we have less than 800 school psychologists in our state supporting the needs of 1.5 million students. So the fact that North Carolina received the recognition and visibility during this national convention where we had 5,000 people from across the country is certainly something that we truly, truly appreciated. I'm going to give you a little bit of, I'm going to go through these slides and get to the end and go back to the beginning to get to our award recipients. But the first slide that you see here is actually was something that was recognized during the keynote. We had a slide put up of one of our practitioners, Ashley Taylor Layton over there, with Representative McKissick in Durham. And she had her baby in tote and everything too. And what NASP did was like highlighted North Carolina's advocacy efforts in working with our state legislators and having conversations around the real problems that we're facing in our schools around student mental health. And so Ashley had just recently had her baby, but she brings her everywhere. So she went to the legislative office building with her as well to talk about those issues. The other picture on the left is what our national participants across the country saw. This is just a snapshot of our sea of red that was very visible throughout the conference. And making connections. This was after our award recipients were announced. You can see them, and I'm going to talk more about them. They're right in the middle. Rhonda Armistead on the left in the middle, and Lee Kokinas on the right, are surrounded by their sea of school psychologists. We had a lot of visibility as a result of their awards and some other things that went on during the conference, and there was a lot of attention drawn to our state as a result. So I thought that was good to highlight. We also have a lot of school psychologists volunteering their time to, at this point, they were hosting a recruitment booth at the National Convention, and we have some of our colleagues from Cabarrus County and Union County, actually, my former district, that are there working that recruitment booth and talking all about North Carolina and trying to get more qualified, talented providers here in this state. They dedicated 2.5 days of their time during the convention for this. Interestingly enough, our keynote speaker at the convention was Michael Bonner, who it was, until most recently, a second grade teacher in Pitt County. And he was such a dynamic speaker, but it was interesting that our national convention had him as our keynote when we had a lot of things going on that drew attention in North Carolina. This was just another underscoring point, and he gave a great keynote address, again, to over 5,000 people in that room, highlighting the work in North Carolina. One thing that also occurred was there was a presidential recognition by the National Association to Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools School Psychology Department for their participation in the Excellence in School Psychological Services Recognition Program. There was a pilot project, and we have 3 of our practitioners from Charlotte-Meck pictured here. I believe one of them is in the audience. Cindy Shaw is here today as well, in center of that picture. So that was a really nice recognition that was given to Charlotte-Mecklenburg as well. So now I'm going to go back to the beginning and really talk about our award recipients. 2 factors, major factors, contributing to the attention that North Carolina received at the convention were the 2 major awards that were provided. During this convention, the Lifetime Achievement Award and the School Psychologist of the Year Award are the biggies. And this is the first time in the history of these awards that we had North Carolina practitioners receiving both in the same year. Amazing. So this brought, by nature of Lee and Rhonda's work, this brought a lot of attention to our state. And when they saw us in our red t-shirts, people were like really wanting to know more about all of the great quality providers that exist in North Carolina. So we definitely need more of them. So Lee Kokinas, at the top left and at the bottom right, she received the National School Psychologist of the Year, and this award recognizes excellence in the provision of school psychological services by a field-based practitioner. This is actually the second time in the past 4 years that a North Carolina practitioner has received this national award. In 2016, we had another awardee who's also in the room today for this event, and I'll talk more about that when I get to the end of our presentation. So this is truly affirming the quality of practitioners that we have in the state. This hasn't happened in NAS history before. Rhonda Armistead received the Lifetime Achievement Award. And this is not only the first time ever that a North Carolina professional has received this award. This is the first time in the history of the 20-year history of this award that a practitioner, rather than a published researcher or an academic scholar, has received this award. So first time in 20 years that this award for lifetime achievement actually went to a practitioner on the ground doing the work, and it came right out of North Carolina. So I'm going to just give you a snapshot, a very limited snapshot in the time I have of Rhonda and Lee's work. Lee joined Wake County Public School System in 2006, where she provides comprehensive school psychological services. She serves grades K through 8. She also demonstrates a high level of leadership at both the district, state, and of course her building levels. At the district level, Lee chairs her department's Promoting School Psychology Committee. So this is a communication and visibility effort within the context of school psychology that works to expand awareness across the district and in the local community of what school psychologists actually are trained to do and the services that they're actually trained to provide. As I said earlier, it's often misunderstood because we have to prioritize testing, so it often is the only thing that we're associated with doing. But she has raised awareness in the school psychologist's role in academic and social emotional learning support, and their presence on social media has expanded as a result of this effort. She also maintains a professional website and blog to share information about her role to others and spread the wealth, and has been highly involved in the school psychology MTSS committee, helping to build the infrastructure that's needed around professional learning and training, as well as establishing timelines within her given system of Wake County, the largest system in the state, to support total school improvement within that multi-tiered system of support infrastructure. At the building level, this is the exciting part because this is where you work more directly. She serves on multiple problem-solving teams, including her intervention teams and the instructional leadership teams in her elementary and her middle school. She has 2 schools. Additionally, Lee provides direct support to both students and families by working with small groups of students to build leadership skills and reduce the rates of in-school suspensions with targeted student groups that are at risk for suspension. And this is really cool. I thought that she participates in these downtown parent conferences for families that have limited transportation, and they bring kind of like the services to families in the community. So those are some of the things that Lee does at the building level. And at the state level, Lee is extremely active in the North Carolina School Psychology Association and serves as co-chair of our state's association's Legislative and Public Policy Committee. And she advocates for the comprehensive services that are needed, specific to access to mental health services that the school psychologists are trained to provide. Lee is also a commissioner on our Governor's Commission on Access to a Sound Basic Education, so she serves in that role as well. I will never get tired of saying this. Congratulations to Lee Kokinas. Lee, I'll just give Lee a couple minutes to respond. Put her on the spot.
You don't want to give me too long to respond. And I didn't know I was going to even have a chance to respond, so it's going to be very brief. I just want to Thank you so much for recognizing school psychologists. And I will be very brief. This award is not as much about me as it represents 8 years of diligence and persistence and compassionate advocacy within North Carolina School Psychology Association, which I only plan to be working for about 2 years, and that was 8 years ago. So I took a side path. We have been working diligently on behalf of NC children and all North Carolina children, not just a few. And I want to say that again. We work on behalf of all children. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and the color is green. And so that is I have even dressed strategically for this. I want to say that school psychologists serve fragile humans. We serve fragile humans in schools, and that is not something to be taken lightly in 2019. We often work quietly and confidentially behind the scenes to do this, and so we're not always recognized. And you can see by my voice, this is emotional. And I want to say that we work with deep knowledge, and we are working very hard to address our statewide shortage. And I just want to thank everyone who is partnering with North Carolina School Psychologists. And I didn't plan to get emotional. Sorry, another plan gone awry. I just want to thank everyone for partnering with us and for supporting our wonderful children, because I have a million stories and I'm just one person with a million stories. So thank you so much.
Oh boy, I never get tired of that. Lee's wonderful. So now on to Rhonda, yet another wonderful. Oh wow, Rhonda, just what Rhonda's done, and to be, for a practitioner, first time ever to receive this Lifetime Achievement Award at the national level is a really big deal. Rhonda has made a substantial impact on the profession of school psychology through her role for many, many years as a practitioner, lead school psychologist, and volunteer leader at the local, state, and national levels. For over 30 years, Rhonda has practiced school psychology in both rural and urban school districts. She's been in Arkansas, she's been in Mississippi, and she's spent 22 years here in North Carolina practicing, and as the lead school psychologist in Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, second largest school system. In 2012, Rhonda was recognized with the North Carolina School Psychology Association Practitioner of the Year, both for her practice and for her efforts to implement parent clinics in which school psychologists provided free consultation services to parents coming into the system throughout that time. In 2015, Rhonda received the NCSPA Innovative Practices Award and was actually recognized by the Mental Health Association of the Central Carolinas for her work, which I'll talk a little bit more about here. Her impact on psychological services in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools was exemplified by her development of a collaborative strategic planning process. These efforts included developing professional learning communities for school psychologists. We often don't get that in our systems. We get kind of like forgotten about in terms of establishing professional learning communities for our discipline. Annual book studies on specific focused topic areas, and part of the multi-tiered system of support steering committee within the district. She was also involved in a multi-year initiative to train, this blows me away, all school psychologists in the district, which are probably about 80 or so, in cognitive behavioral therapy. So all of the school psychologists over the course of time receive that training to deliver cognitive behavioral therapy as a supplemental or intensive support to our students in need of that. Although she's recently retired, Rhonda continues to serve the field of school psychology at the national level and at the state level. And again, I will never get tired of saying this, for her lifetime achievement as a school-based practitioner for many, many years, 22 of them in North Carolina. Congratulations, Rhonda.
I appreciate that. Lynn, thank you, and thank you to all. It is quite an honor for me to get dressed and put a suit on. You know, now that I'm retired, this was quite the day. You know, you don't get many opportunities to kind of reflect on those 30-plus years, you know, that you spend in a profession. But as you could tell, I started in Arkansas, and I was thinking about the ratio. When I started in Arkansas and then I spent 2 years in Mississippi, I think the ratio of being a school psychologist to the number of students I served was probably incalculable, because it was just so rural, and I felt like my effect was so ineffective, and so there really wasn't a lot of satisfaction. Moved to Wilson, North Carolina, and that was had quite a few years there. I love that small town. But again, I served multiple schools, and it really wasn't until I got to Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and Charlotte at the time had this incredible model where I had one school. And so if you ask me, does this ratio make any difference? I can tell you, I'm empirically, I've tested that, and it does. It does, because in Charlotte, I had a school there was about 600, which it was a luxury, obviously. But I think about all the things that I did. I did social emotional lessons in classrooms with kids. Now this is, the 90s. This is the mid-90s, so that's very much in vogue today. But did that, and then, lots of involvement with parents. And then the other part that I think I can say is that I started to work systematically, and I think that's where we are in North Carolina. Instead of doing the thing I knew to be right for every child, I wanted to be a part of creating a system that the system supported every child, and that we weren't repeating the thing we knew to do one child at a time. And so I would say that that's the nice way to kind of end your career thinking about the systems. And so multi-tiered systems of support for academic problems and for behavioral health problems, I think is we're definitely on going in the right direction there. So I just kind of wanted to, say thank you and support for school psychologists, for understanding the differences between, I think, where we had been in 30 years and where we need to go in the next 30 years. So I appreciate the honor, though, of being here today.
And to wrap up, thank you for the time that you've allotted for this. But to wrap up, I would catch some heat from Rhonda and Lee if I didn't put the picture up of our Practitioner of the Year with our current 2019 recipients. We have Stephanie Lowe Ellis, as I stated earlier, just 4 years ago, another North Carolina practitioner. We didn't have the opportunity to recognize it here in this room in 2016, but Dr. Stephanie Lowe Ellis on the left-hand side of that picture was the National School Psychologist of the Year. And she is in good company now with Rhonda and Lee. And Stephanie now serves actually as the Executive Director of Exceptional Children and Mental Health Programs within Rockingham County Schools. So she's moved into that role over the past few years. Her contributions are many. Stephanie, would you stand up, please? Stephanie Ellis. You didn't expect all of this, did you? You didn't expect all of this. When I get to talk, I'm going to tell you the whole story. Her contributions are many, but I do want to say that one of the things that Stephanie's work is currently receiving a lot of attention around is the critical work and expertise that she has in threat assessment practices within the district level. She has worked and centered her career around establishing effective models based in existing research, and she has a model within Rockingham County that's getting some attention in our state that will hopefully be applied as a model practice, procedure, protocol for our other districts who need that around that key priority of keeping our students safe. So that's just one of the highlights of Stephanie's many contributions, but she's worked really hard on that, and ever since I've known her has been doing this work. So again, thank you. I know our schools across our state are in desperate need of talented school psychologists like Rhonda, Lee, Stephanie, the others that you see in this room that I can't believe adjusted their schedules to be here today, to assist with the important work that's going on all across our North Carolina public schools. I really appreciate the time to share in this recognition and how big of a deal it is for our field. And I just want to communicate how big of a deal it is for our state to have received these types of recognitions within our practitioners. Once again, on behalf of the children, the families, the school staff, and the communities across North Carolina, Stephanie and Rhonda, I extend deep admiration, sincere appreciation, and celebration of you both. Thank you.
Could I ask Lee, Rhonda, and Stephanie to please come forward so we can take a picture with the board and advisors and continue the celebration?
Amazing.
Proud of you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So good to see you.
You made me cry. You made myself cry.
Send a wave. Congratulations. You got us. You can send that wave.
That wasn't bad. Thank you.
Oh, I know.
Okay, we need, oh, yeah. Probably better.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll give you this.
Congratulations. Thank you so much. I'm not sure where y'all are. You're in the middle.
In the center.
Oh, I know.
Okay, all right. Bring your awards. I'm not sharing this.
We gotta come in a little more.
We're charging by the picture now.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Perfect.
We appreciate y'all.
I wish there were more of you, but we're working on it.
Yes, it's good to meet you.
Yes, I'm going.
She's enjoying retirement.
Y'all are just going down to 150. I think I went to everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Try to do 1 o'clock, if not, definitely. Thank y'all.
Congratulations again. See, did you?
Hey, guess what?
Again, our thanks to all the school psychologists across North Carolina. I'd be remiss at not saying that many of us around this table have felt the impact of your profession and your personal dedication and skill on our children, both the children that we serve and the children that we were able to bring into this world. So thank you so much for this opportunity to celebrate with you. So now we'll begin our committee reports, and I remind committee chairs in the audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be done at the end of the agenda via roll call. We'll begin with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, led by its chair, Mr. J.B. Buxton. Mr. Buxton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm joined on the Student Learning Achievement Committee by our Vice Chair, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. We have 4 items on today's agenda. We'll talk about 2 of them in this section. 1 action on first reading, a discussion item, and then 2 consent agenda items. I'd also tell folks that we did 2 items during our planning session that were part of the SLA committee. One, the department's response to the framework for action on early reading, which presented out a number of different action items and a timeline for those action items and potential approaches to the implementation of the 9 priorities that we had passed in March. I think some very good work by the department and more to come. And then second, we took a look at grades 4 through 12 efforts in literacy and did kind of a comprehensive walk through the department and the state's focus in this area. So it was a good set of SLA-related discussions yesterday at the board. Today, we'll start with SLA 1. Some of you may know, some of you may have forgotten that we actually can be an accrediting body. And so East Surrey High School has requested review by the department and approval by the board. It's accreditation. And Dr. Howard, are you going to come up for this? Dr. Tammy Howard will present this. Again, this will be an action on first reading, so we'll vote on this today.
Good morning.
Morning.
This item is indeed for East Surrey High School, who is requesting accreditation from the board. And in the policy, it specifies, of course, that schools may request accreditation based on a quality assurance process that includes self-reflection, analysis of student performance data, and if required, outside peer review or audit. So the information that is attached to this item includes the data that we would expect, and there is a chart that gives their performance on the ACT, on work keys or cohort graduation rate, as well as attached to that is their school improvement plan and their comprehensive needs assessment that they conducted. So on behalf of all that information, we would recommend that accreditation be approved.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Any questions from members of the board? Seeing none, we will have this vote a little bit later today. Again, action on first read. Second item, which is a discussion item, SLA 2 SBE Policy Amendment CCRE 001. This is course for credit. This deals with workforce continuing education pathways, and I want to differentiate it from some work we've done previously. It's related, where we've looked at courses, community college courses that we've combined for high school credit. This deals with workforce continuing education.
So one of our favorite policies, Course for Credit, is coming back to you. I think we bring it back every month. But because that's where we really want to expand opportunities for students, and we're so happy about that. But it does take time to merge our K-20 systems, and so we appreciate you all working with us on that. Just to give you a little bit of history, then Trey is going to actually walk through you on the policy. As it stands currently, we give dual enrollment credit towards courses that are in curriculum programs at the university and community college systems, because they have a common course library and they have similar outcomes for a certain course. So continuing education, workforce continuing education, is a separate branch in the community college system, and actually those courses don't go on their transcript, but we are very fortunate that the legislator added that as an opportunity for our students to participate in. And so with that, what we are trying to do is figure out how to ensure that we have quality for our students and expanding opportunities, because continuing education can vary from a few hours in one particular college. That same topic could be taught 50 hours in another, just like our continuing education, right, where we get CEU credits. It could vary depending on different things. And so we have a proposal for you all that we've been working with the community college system on, that we feel will maintain quality for our students who are young little ones, but yet expand opportunities. And Trey is going to share with you about that.
Mr. Michaels.
Thank you all. Good morning again.
Morning.
Somebody would have to do that, wouldn't it? It would be me. So I do want to walk you through, I believe that you received in your documents the policy and the policy amendment. So I'll read that briefly for you. Effective 2019-20, high school credit may be awarded for articulated college and career promise, CCP, workforce continuing education pathways that have been approved by the CCP leadership team, and do not duplicate efforts by the high school. The CCP-LT consists of representatives from the NCDPI, CTE, and Advanced Learning and Gifted Education divisions, and the Community College System office representatives from Workforce Continuing Education, Career and Technical Education, and academic programs. That's the adjustment to the policy that we propose for you today. In addition to that, I've got a whole bunch of notes of how we have gotten here and where we plan to go next, if you'd like to hear some of that as well.
Let me first thank you, Mr. Mikes. First get just any questions about the language. I think this is good collaboration between our systems. And I would just say one other thing by way of background. There is some legislation over in the General Assembly which would essentially recognize any workforce credit. So it could be a 15-hour course, workforce course, that would be equivalent to a full high school course. So we're trying to create alignment, kind of breadth and depth, real focus on a pathway that articulates. And that's where, coming together, the community college system, I think we would be responsible, as Ms. Shaw Coltrane was saying, to the needs of our students. So let me get any thoughts about the language or questions about the language. Okay.
More details?
Seeing
or?
none, I think we're okay.
Okay, great.
I think we're
Thank
good.
you all.
So this is a discussion item. We will be bringing it back if we have questions, especially if you have questions from representatives from your school systems. We'll want to know that, but I think we're good for now.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mikes. We have two other items on our consent agenda. One deal, SLA 3, Committee of Practitioners Advisory Committee. You may remember we approved that advisory committee with one outstanding member to be named later, so to speak. And so you have a resume for Mr. Sean Strain, who would also be joining the Committee of Practitioners, and would recommend that appointment to you. SLA 4 is our second one. It's our 7 appointments to the State Advisory Council on Indian Education. We've got, I believe it's 6 reappointments, and then one member, Joy Rector, is resigning, and Rhea Jacobs would be replacing her. Again, would commend those appointments to you. Those are on the consent agenda. Mr. Chairman, that's our agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. We're fortunately ahead of schedule, but we're going to go ahead and break for lunch. But we do have one item that we need to discuss in closed session. So let's grab lunch and then convene in closed session in the boardroom over lunch, and then we can reconvene in open session. So first, I need a motion to go into closed session. Mr. Vice Chair.
I move that the State Board of Education go into closed session to consult with our attorneys on attorney-client privilege matters and to discuss information that is privileged and confidential pursuant to 09 NCAC 06B.0103, which is confidentiality of solicitation documents, and 09 NCAC 06B.0309, which is evaluation.
Motion by Mr. Duncan. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dr. Oxendine. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Vice Chair Dutcher?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Okay, so let's be in closed session by 11:35 in the conference room, and we will strive to be back in open session 12:15 to 12:20.